The first thing I did after eating that cursed ramen was check my reflection in the bathroom mirror to see if anything had changed about my appearance. What I discovered was that my ordinary brown eyes had transformed into a brilliant golden color that seemed to glow with an inner light. I had always been just another high school student struggling with mediocre grades and zero athletic ability. But that single bowl of ramen from the mysterious shop would change everything forever. It all started 3 days ago when I was walking home from another disappointing day at school, where I had failed yet another math test. The rain was pouring down heavily, and I was soaked to the bone when I noticed a small ramen shop tucked between two abandoned buildings that I had never seen before. The neon sign flickered erratically with strange symbols that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Steam was rising from the windows, and the most incredible aroma was drifting out onto the street, making my stomach growl loudly despite my terrible mood. I pushed open the door, and a bell chimed with an otherworldly tone that seemed to resonate in my bones. The interior was dimly lit by paper lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls, and there was only one other customer sitting at the far end of the counter. An elderly man with a long white beard and eyes that seemed ancient beyond measure stood behind the counter wearing a traditional chef's outfit. He looked up at me with a knowing smile that made me feel like he had been expecting my arrival for quite some time. "Welcome, young one," he said in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. "You look like someone who needs more than just ordinary food tonight. I can offer you something special, but I must warn you that once you taste it, your life will never be the same again. Are you prepared for such a transformation?" I thought he was just being dramatic, like those theme restaurant workers who stay in character, so I nodded and asked for whatever his specialty was. The old man's smile grew wider as he turned toward his cooking station and began preparing something that looked like regular ramen, but smelled like nothing I had ever experienced before. The broth was a deep crimson color that seemed to swirl with its own internal motion, and strange herbs floated on the surface that I couldn't identify. When he placed the bowl in front of me, the steam rising from it formed shapes that almost looked like dragons dancing in the air. "This is the Crimson Dragon Ramen," he explained, as he set down a pair of ornate chopsticks beside the bowl. "It contains the essence of an ancient dragon that was sealed away long ago by powerful sorcerers. Those who consume it will gain abilities beyond mortal comprehension, but the price is that you can never return to your ordinary life. The dragon's power will flow through your veins and awaken talents you never knew you possessed." I laughed and told him he was really committed to the act, then picked up the chopsticks and took my first bite. The moment the noodles touched my tongue, an explosion of flavor unlike anything I had ever tasted flooded my senses. It was like liquid fire mixed with the essence of lightning and the depth of the ocean all combined into one incredible experience. Heat spread through my entire body, starting from my stomach and radiating outward until every cell felt like it was being supercharged with raw energy. The old man watched me intently as I devoured the entire bowl without stopping, unable to control myself as some primal hunger had taken over. When I finally finished the last drop of broth, the world around me seemed to shift and become more vivid than ever before. Colors appeared more saturated, sounds became clearer, and I could sense things that had been invisible to me just minutes earlier. The other customer at the end of the counter turned to look at me, and I realized with shock that he wasn't entirely human but had scales along his jawline and eyes like a reptile. "Congratulations," the old man said as he collected the empty bowl. "You have successfully bonded with the Crimson Dragon's essence. Your journey into the supernatural world begins now, and you will discover abilities that most humans can only dream of possessing. However, remember that great power comes with great responsibility, and there are those who will seek to use you for their own purposes." I tried to ask him what he meant, but suddenly felt dizzy and had to grip the counter to keep from falling over. The room began to spin around me, and strange visions flashed through my mind, showing glimpses of battles between creatures I had never seen before. Dragons soared through stormy skies, breathing streams of multicolored fire, while warriors wielding glowing weapons fought against shadowy monsters that seemed to absorb light itself. In these visions, I saw myself standing among them with golden eyes blazing and power crackling around my hands like controlled lightning. When the visions finally stopped, I found myself standing outside the ramen shop in the rain again with no memory of how I had gotten there. I looked back toward where the shop had been, but there was only an empty lot overgrown with weeds and a rusty sign that had been weathered beyond recognition. My clothes were completely dry despite the heavy rainfall, and when I reached into my pocket to check my wallet, I found a small card with strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The walk home felt different than usual, as my senses seemed heightened to an incredible degree. I could hear conversations from inside houses as I passed by, smell individual ingredients in meals being cooked blocks away, and see in perfect detail despite the darkness and rain. When a stray cat darted across my path, time seemed to slow down, and I watched each droplet of water fall from its fur in crystal clear slow motion. My reflection in store windows showed those same golden eyes that now seemed to contain swirling depths like molten metal. At home, my parents didn't notice anything different about me as they were too busy arguing about bills and work stress in the kitchen. I went straight to my room and locked the door behind me, then stood in front of my mirror trying to understand what had happened to me. The golden eyes stared back with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying, and when I concentrated, I could see faint traces of energy flowing beneath my skin like luminous veins. I decided to test whether the changes were just in my imagination by attempting to lift my heavy desk that normally required two people to move. To my amazement, I was able to lift it effortlessly with just one hand, and when I set it down, the wooden floor didn't even creak under the weight. My strength had increased dramatically, but that was just the beginning of the transformations that were taking place within my body. Over the next few hours, I discovered that my speed had also improved beyond human limits when I accidentally moved across my room in what felt like an instant. My reflexes were so enhanced that I could catch falling objects before they had dropped more than an inch, and my coordination had become so precise that I could balance a pencil on its tip on my fingertip indefinitely. The most incredible discovery came when I realized that I could sense the emotions and intentions of people around me like a sixth sense that revealed their true feelings regardless of what they said or did. The card from the ramen shop began to glow brighter as night fell, and symbols appeared on its surface that somehow conveyed information directly into my mind. It was an invitation to something called the Midnight Tournament, a gathering of individuals who had been awakened to supernatural abilities through various means. The tournament would take place in 3 nights at a location that would be revealed only to those who possessed genuine power, and participation was both an honor and a dangerous trial that could result in either great rewards or terrible consequences. I spent the rest of the night researching everything I could find about supernatural abilities and hidden worlds that might exist parallel to ordinary reality. Most of what I found online seemed like fiction or the ramblings of conspiracy theorists, but some accounts contained details that resonated with my own experience in ways that seemed too specific to be coincidental. There were stories of ancient artifacts that granted power to those worthy of wielding them, secret organizations that monitored supernatural activity, and individuals who had transcended human limitations through contact with otherworldly forces. By morning, I had made my decision to embrace whatever destiny awaited me, rather than trying to return to my previous ordinary existence. The dragon's essence flowing through my veins had awakened something that felt more authentic than anything I had ever experienced before, and I knew that there was no going back to being just another mediocre student struggling through high school. My golden eyes reflected a determination that surprised even me as I prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead in this new chapter of my existence. The next morning at school, I immediately noticed that my enhanced senses made the crowded hallways feel overwhelming in ways I had never experienced before. Every conversation, footstep, and locker slam created a symphony of sound that my brain struggled to filter properly. The fluorescent lights seemed blindingly bright, and I could smell everything from the cafeteria's mystery meat to the janitor's cleaning supplies from 3 floors away. I had to concentrate intensely just to appear normal, while navigating through the chaos of teenage social dynamics that suddenly felt trivial compared to the supernatural world I had glimpsed. During first period math class, the same subject that had been my greatest weakness, I found myself understanding complex equations with perfect clarity before the teacher had finished writing them on the board. Numbers and formulas that had previously looked like meaningless symbols now revealed their logical patterns as clearly as reading simple sentences. When Mrs. Henderson called on me to solve a particularly difficult problem, I walked to the front of the class and completed it in seconds while my classmates stared in shocked silence at my sudden transformation from class dunce to mathematical genius. The physical education period became even more challenging to navigate without revealing my newfound abilities. During our usual basketball scrimmage, I had to consciously hold back my enhanced speed and strength to avoid drawing unwanted attention from my peers and teachers. Even while restraining myself significantly, I moved with a fluid grace that felt completely natural, but looked unnaturally smooth to outside observers. When Jake Morrison, the star athlete who had bullied me for years, tried his usual intimidation tactics, I could sense his insecurity and fear beneath his aggressive facade through the emotional awareness that came with my dragon-enhanced perception. At lunch, I sat alone in my usual corner spot and pulled out the glowing card to examine it more closely in daylight. The symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them, and touching the surface with my fingertips sent small jolts of energy up my arm. Other students walked past without seeming to notice the supernatural artifact in my hands, which suggested that only those with awakened abilities could perceive its true nature. I wondered how many others in my school might be hiding similar secrets behind masks of ordinary teenage behavior. The afternoon brought an unexpected test when a new student transferred into my chemistry class during the final period. She had striking silver hair that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light and pale blue eyes that reminded me of Arctic ice. When she introduced herself as Luna Nightshade, her gaze met mine across the classroom, and I felt a jolt of recognition that had nothing to do with ever meeting her before. There was something about her presence that resonated with the dragon essence flowing through my veins, suggesting that she possessed her own supernatural nature. During the lab experiment, Luna was assigned as my partner, and I noticed that her movements had the same unnaturally fluid quality that I was struggling to suppress in myself. When she accidentally knocked over a beaker of chemical solution, I instinctively reached out to catch it before it could hit the floor. The save required reflexes far beyond human capability, and Luna's eyes widened as she realized what she had witnessed. She leaned closer and whispered that we needed to talk privately after class about matters that couldn't be discussed around ordinary humans. After the final bell rang, Luna led me to an abandoned classroom in the oldest wing of the school building, where dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon sunlight. She explained that she was part of an organization that monitored individuals who had recently awakened to supernatural abilities, and my dramatic transformation over the past day had triggered their detection systems. The Crimson Dragon. Ramen I had consumed was one of several legendary catalysts that could unlock dormant potential in those with the proper spiritual alignment, but it also marked me as a target for various factions that sought to control or eliminate awakened individuals. Luna revealed that the midnight tournament mentioned on my card was actually a recruitment event hosted by the Shadow Consortium, a secretive group that collected powerful individuals for purposes that were rarely beneficial to the recruits themselves. She warned me that attending would likely result in either forced servitude or elimination if I refused to cooperate with their agenda. However, she also explained that avoiding the tournament entirely would only delay the inevitable confrontation, as the consortium had ways of tracking those who possessed significant supernatural abilities and would eventually locate me regardless of my choices. The alternative she proposed was joining her organization, known as the Dawn Guardians, which worked to protect newly awakened individuals and maintain the balance between the supernatural and ordinary worlds. Their training facilities were hidden throughout major cities, and they offered education in controlling and developing supernatural abilities while providing protection from hostile factions. The decision would need to be made quickly, as the consortium's agents were likely already investigating reports of unusual activity in our area. As Luna spoke, I could sense the sincerity in her emotions and detected no deception in her words, which gave me confidence that her offer was genuine. She demonstrated her own abilities by causing frost to form on the classroom windows with a gesture of her hand, then melting it away, just as easily to prove her credibility. The ice crystals formed intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of ancient conflicts between forces of light and darkness, with individual heroes standing against overwhelming odds to protect innocent people from supernatural threats. That evening, I sat in my room weighing the options before me, while the dragon essence continued to strengthen my connection to the supernatural realm. Through my window, I could see strange shadows moving between buildings that were invisible to ordinary human perception, and occasional flashes of colored light in the sky that suggested ongoing conflicts between powerful entities. The card from the ramen shop pulsed with increasing intensity as the tournament date approached, while Luna's contact information glowed with a softer, more welcoming radiance that seemed to offer hope rather than obligation. My parents remained oblivious to the transformation occurring within their own home, continuing their routine of work stress and mundane concerns while their son grappled with choices that could affect the fate of both worlds. I realized that regardless of which path I chose, my relationships with family and former friends would never be the same again. The dragon's power had elevated me beyond the concerns of ordinary human existence, but it had also isolated me from the simple pleasures and connections that had previously defined my identity. The next morning brought news reports of unexplained phenomena occurring throughout the city, including witnesses describing creatures that shouldn't exist, and displays of impossible abilities by seemingly ordinary individuals. Luna's warnings about increased supernatural activity proved accurate as the hidden world began to bleed through into public awareness despite the best efforts of various organizations to maintain secrecy. I watched the reports with my enhanced perception and could detect the truth behind the sanitized explanations offered by authorities who were clearly unprepared for the reality of what was happening. During my walk to school, I encountered 3 individuals in dark suits who radiated an aura of menace that my supernatural senses immediately identified as hostile. They approached with smiles that didn't reach their cold eyes and spoke in polite tones that barely concealed underlying threats. These were clearly agents of the Shadow Consortium that Luna had warned me about, and they made it clear that my attendance at the midnight tournament was not actually optional, despite the invitation's wording. Their leader, a woman with unnaturally pale skin and black eyes that seemed to absorb light, explained that refusing their generous offer would result in consequences that extended beyond just my own safety. The woman's words sent chills down my spine that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the dragon essence recognizing a genuine threat to its host. I could sense the dark energy emanating from all 3 agents, like a suffocating fog that seemed to drain warmth from the surrounding air. Their leader stepped closer, and I noticed that her shadow moved independently from her body, writhing and reaching toward me with tendrils of pure darkness that only my enhanced vision could perceive clearly. We understand that young awakened individuals often feel overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of their capabilities, she said with a voice that sounded like honey poured over broken glass. The consortium offers structure and purpose to those who might otherwise struggle to control their newfound gifts. Think of us as mentors rather than recruiters, guiding you toward your true potential in ways that amateur organizations simply cannot match. Her companions flanked me on either side with movements that were too synchronized to be natural, and I realized they were communicating through some form of telepathic link that allowed perfect coordination. The one on my left had hands that flickered between human flesh and what appeared to be metallic claws, while the one on my right possessed eyes that occasionally flashed with an inner fire that suggested barely contained supernatural abilities. These weren't ordinary humans enhanced by artifacts or training, but something fundamentally different that had been shaped by prolonged exposure to dark supernatural forces. I politely declined their invitation and tried to continue walking toward school, but found my path blocked by an invisible barrier that felt like walking into a wall of solid air. The leader's smile widened to reveal teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for any human mouth, and her shadow began to spread across the sidewalk like spilled ink. She explained that the tournament was merely a formality, and that my participation in the consortium's plans had already been decided by forces far beyond my current understanding. The dragon essence within me responded to the threat by flooding my system with protective energy that made my golden eyes blaze with inner fire. Without conscious thought, I found myself assuming a combat stance that felt both completely natural and utterly foreign, as if muscle memory from countless battles was awakening within my enhanced physique. The agents noticed the change immediately, and their polite facades dropped away to reveal the predatory creatures they truly were underneath their human disguises. What followed was my first real supernatural combat experience, and it taught me that having enhanced abilities meant nothing without the knowledge and training to use them effectively. The leader attacked with whips of living shadow that moved faster than anything I had ever encountered, while her companions launched coordinated strikes with their transformed limbs. I managed to dodge most of their attacks through pure instinct and enhanced reflexes, but several shadow tendrils found their mark and left burning sensations wherever they touched my skin. My counterattacks were clumsy and unrefined, relying entirely on brute strength rather than technique or strategy. When I threw a punch enhanced by dragon power, it shattered the concrete sidewalk but completely missed my intended target, who had already moved to a different position. The agents circled me like experienced predators toying with inexperienced prey, clearly intending to exhaust my energy reserves before moving in for the final capture rather than risking serious injury to a valuable potential recruit. Just when I thought the situation was hopeless, Luna appeared from seemingly nowhere with abilities that put my amateur efforts to shame. Ice crystals formed in the air around her hands and launched themselves at the consortium agents with deadly precision, while frost spread across the ground beneath their feet to disrupt their coordinated movement patterns. Her attacks were elegant and efficient, each one serving multiple purposes of offense, defense, and battlefield control that demonstrated years of professional training. The battle that followed was like watching a master artist work with supernatural forces as her medium. Luna created walls of ice to block shadow attacks, generated blinding flashes of crystalline light to confuse the agent's enhanced senses, and manipulated the temperature around us to interfere with their dark energy manipulation. Within minutes, she had forced all three consortium agents into a defensive position, despite being outnumbered and facing opponents with significant experience advantages. The leader realized that their ambush had failed and made a strategic withdrawal, but not before issuing a warning that this encounter was merely the opening move in a much larger game. She promised that the consortium had resources and influence that extended far beyond what either Luna or I could imagine, and that avoiding the tournament would only delay an inevitable confrontation that would occur on terms far less favorable than the current offer of voluntary cooperation. As the agents dissolved into shadows that scattered in multiple directions, Luna grabbed my hand and led me through a series of alleyways that seemed to exist in spaces between the normal city blocks. Her route took us through doors that opened onto completely different locations than their exteriors suggested, down staircases that descended far deeper than the surrounding buildings could accommodate, and across bridges that spanned gaps filled with swirling mists rather than ordinary air. We emerged inside what appeared to be an abandoned subway station, but the architecture was wrong for anything that had ever existed in our city. The walls were covered with murals depicting battles between various supernatural factions throughout history, and the platform extended into tunnels that glowed with their own internal illumination. Luna explained that this was one of many hidden facilities maintained by the Dawn Guardians, connected to similar locations worldwide through a transportation network that existed parallel to ordinary reality. Other individuals were training in the vast underground space, demonstrating abilities that made my dragon-enhanced strength seem modest by comparison. A young man was manipulating gravity to walk up walls and across the ceiling while practicing combat forms that incorporated three-dimensional movement. A woman was phase-shifting through solid barriers while maintaining perfect control over her molecular density, appearing and disappearing at will throughout the training area. The most impressive display came from an elderly gentleman who was teaching a group of students how to manipulate time itself on a localized scale. He demonstrated by accelerating his personal time stream to move at superhuman speeds, then slowing it down until he appeared frozen in place while the world rushed past him. His students were practicing much simpler applications like briefly slowing down falling objects or accelerating their own healing processes. But even these basic techniques required precise control that took years to master properly. Luna introduced me to Commander Sarah Chen, the facility director who possessed the ability to see potential futures and guide strategic decisions based on probability analysis. She explained that the consortium's interest in me went beyond just my current power level and related to something called the Dragon Prophecy, an ancient prediction about individuals who would bond with primordial essences during times of supernatural upheaval. According to the prophecy, such individuals would play crucial roles in determining the outcome of conflicts that could reshape both the hidden and ordinary worlds. The training program Luna offered was intensive and dangerous, requiring complete dedication for at least 6 months before I would be considered minimally prepared for independent operations. During this time, I would learn to control and refine my abilities while studying the complex political landscape of supernatural factions, ancient histories that weren't recorded in any human textbooks, and combat techniques developed specifically for fighting otherworldly opponents. The alternative was facing the consortium and other hostile forces, with nothing but raw power and good intentions, which historically resulted in either corruption or elimination. Commander Chen showed me surveillance footage of previous Dragon Essence recipients who had chosen different paths, and the results were sobering. Those who tried to ignore their awakening and return to ordinary lives inevitably lost control of their abilities in ways that caused massive collateral damage. Those who accepted consortium recruitment became powerful but morally compromised agents who served agendas that often conflicted with human welfare. Only those who received proper training and support from organizations like the Dawn Guardians managed to maintain their humanity while developing their supernatural potential responsibly. The facility's medical wing contained equipment that could analyze my transformation in ways that ordinary science couldn't approach. Dr. Martinez, a former neurosurgeon who had awakened healing abilities after a near-death experience, explained that the Dragon Essence was continuing to evolve within my system and would eventually grant abilities far beyond enhanced physical capabilities. She detected traces of elemental manipulation potential, limited precognitive flashes, and the early stages of energy projection development that would manifest over the following weeks. However, she also warned that uncontrolled development could result in what they called essence burn, a condition where supernatural power overwhelmed the human nervous system and caused permanent psychological damage. Previous cases had resulted in individuals who retained their abilities but lost their sanity, becoming unpredictable forces that required constant monitoring or, in extreme cases, elimination for public safety. The structured training program was designed to prevent such outcomes by teaching mental discipline alongside physical techniques. That evening, I called my parents to explain that I would be staying with a friend for an extended period while participating in an advanced academic program. The lie came surprisingly easily, and I realized that the Dragon Essence was already changing more than just my physical capabilities. My enhanced empathy allowed me to sense exactly what they needed to hear to feel reassured, and I found myself manipulating their emotions with subtle vocal cues that bypassed their conscious awareness entirely. The ethical implications of such abilities troubled me deeply, especially when I considered how the consortium agents had used similar techniques during our earlier confrontation. Luna assured me that learning to recognize and resist emotional manipulation was a crucial part of the training curriculum, both for self protection and to avoid becoming the type of person who used such abilities carelessly. She emphasized that power without wisdom and restraint inevitably led to corruption, regardless of original intentions or moral foundations. My first night in the Guardian facility was spent in a dormitory with other newly awakened individuals who were beginning their own training programs. My roommate was Marcus, a college student who had gained the ability to manipulate plant life after being struck by lightning during a camping trip that turned out to involve a supernatural storm. He described the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly being able to accelerate or control the growth of any vegetation within a several-mile radius, and the constant fear of accidentally causing ecological disasters through careless thoughts or emotional outbursts. The training schedule began before dawn with meditation exercises designed to strengthen mental discipline and develop conscious control over supernatural abilities. The techniques were drawn from various mystical traditions, but adapted for individuals with enhanced capabilities, focusing on creating mental barriers that could contain and direct supernatural energies safely. I learned to visualize the dragon essence as a river of molten gold flowing through channels within my body, with conscious will acting as a series of gates and valves that could regulate the flow according to specific needs. Physical conditioning followed the meditation period, but the exercises were unlike anything taught in ordinary fitness programs. We practiced maintaining perfect balance while supernatural forces attempted to disrupt our equilibrium, develop the muscle memory needed for combat against opponents with impossible abilities, and learn to coordinate enhanced physical capabilities with strategic thinking under extreme stress. The training equipment was designed to adapt to each individual's power level, becoming more challenging as our abilities developed over time. Academic studies occupied the afternoon hours and covered subjects that had never been taught in any conventional educational institution. We learned about the hidden history of supernatural conflicts, the political structures of various otherworldly factions, and the scientific principles underlying abilities that seem to violate natural laws. The most fascinating lessons involved case studies of previous awakened individuals, analyzing their successes and failures to identify patterns that could guide our own development paths. Combat training was scheduled for evening hours when our energy reserves were lower, forcing us to rely on technique and strategy rather than brute force applications of supernatural abilities. Luna served as my primary instructor and proved to be a demanding teacher who accepted nothing less than perfect execution of each technique. She explained that sloppy habits developed during training would become fatal weaknesses during actual combat situations, where opponents would exploit any opening or inefficiency without hesitation or mercy. The most challenging aspect of the program was learning to maintain normal human relationships while developing abilities that fundamentally changed my perspective on reality itself. Video calls with my parents required careful emotional control to avoid revealing the transformation occurring within me, while former classmates seemed increasingly shallow and naive compared to the profound issues I was now grappling with daily. Luna warned that this sense of alienation was common among awakened individuals and required conscious effort to overcome through deliberate maintenance of human connections and empathy. As my first week of training concluded, I received intelligence reports indicating that consortium agents were conducting systematic searches throughout the city for traces of my supernatural signature. They had interrogated several of my former classmates and teachers, always using subtle mental influence to avoid creating suspicious memories while gathering information about my habits and associations. The hunt was intensifying as the tournament date approached, suggesting that my participation had become crucial to whatever larger plans they were implementing. Commander Chen called me into her office to discuss the strategic implications of the consortium's increased activity and the difficult choices that lay ahead. She explained that remaining hidden indefinitely was becoming impossible as my abilities continued to strengthen and generate supernatural signatures that were detectable across increasing distances. The dragon essence bonding process would reach a critical phase within the next few days, after which concealment would require techniques that were beyond my current training level. The decision point was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated, and Commander Chen's analysis of probability streams showed increasingly narrow windows for successful outcomes. She spread a series of photographs across her desk, showing various locations throughout the city where supernatural disturbances had been detected over the past 24 hours. Each incident corresponded to moments when my emotional state had fluctuated during training exercises, proving that the dragon essence was broadcasting my presence far more widely than our shielding techniques could contain. 3 distinct faction representatives had requested meetings with the Dawn Guardians' leadership within the past 6 hours, each claiming urgent business related to the emerging dragon bearer. The Celestial Court had sent an ambassador whose presence alone caused temperature fluctuations throughout the facility, while the Voidwalkers had delivered their message through a series of reality distortions that spelled out coordinates in languages that predated human civilization. Most concerning was the communication from the Elder Council, an organization so secretive that most supernatural beings considered them mythical rather than actual political entities. Commander Chen activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of various faction agents throughout the metropolitan area, with different colors indicating their estimated threat levels and probable objectives. The consortium forces had tripled in number since our morning encounter, with several high-ranking operatives arriving via methods that bypassed conventional transportation entirely. Luna pointed out that the red markers indicating hostile entities now outnumbered the blue markers representing potential allies by a ratio that made direct confrontation inadvisable. Dr. Saiturax. Martinez joined our strategy session with medical readings that painted an even more urgent picture of my developing condition. The Dragon Essence integration process was accelerating beyond all previous documented cases, with cellular modifications occurring at rates that should have been impossible for human physiology to sustain. My enhanced abilities were growing exponentially stronger each day, but the rapid changes were also destabilizing my connection to baseline humanity in ways that required immediate intervention to prevent permanent psychological dissociation. The most alarming discovery was that my supernatural signature had begun resonating with ancient artifacts scattered throughout the region, causing dormant magical items to activate spontaneously and attract unwanted attention from collectors who specialized in acquiring such relics. A medieval sword housed in the city museum had started glowing with inner fire during visiting hours, while a stone tablet in the university's archaeology department had begun displaying shifting symbols that revealed prophecies about coming conflicts between light and shadow. Marcus burst into the meeting with news that his own plant manipulation abilities had detected something massive moving through the underground root networks beneath the city. The entity was too large and too alien for him to identify specifically, but its presence was causing widespread distress among every form of vegetation within a 50-mile radius. Trees were dropping their leaves out of season, flowers were withering despite perfect growing conditions, and grass was growing in unnatural patterns that formed geometric shapes visible from aerial surveillance. Luna's ice crystals began forming spontaneously around her hands as her own supernatural senses detected approaching danger, while Commander Chen's probability analysis showed rapidly deteriorating odds for maintaining our current defensive position. The facility's automated warning systems activated with alerts indicating multiple breach attempts at access points that shouldn't have been discoverable by outside forces. Emergency protocols initiated lockdown procedures as blast doors sealed critical areas and defensive barriers powered up around the perimeter. The training area transformed into a war room as instructors who had been teaching meditation techniques moments earlier began distributing weapons that hummed with supernatural energies. Students who had been practicing basic ability control were now receiving crash courses in combat applications as the reality of our situation became undeniable. The peaceful learning environment evaporated as everyone prepared for a siege that could determine the fate of not just our facility, but the entire balance of power between supernatural factions. Through the facility's enhanced surveillance network, we watched as ordinary humans throughout the city began experiencing strange dreams and unexplained sensations that indicated the barriers between worlds were weakening. Emergency services received reports of impossible sightings. Electronic equipment malfunctioned in patterns that suggested supernatural interference, and sensitive individuals started manifesting minor abilities that would normally take years of exposure to develop naturally. The dragon essence within me responded to the mounting tension by flooding my system with combat-ready energy that made every nerve ending feel like it was connected to a high-voltage power source. My golden eyes blazed with intensity that forced everyone around me to squint when looking in my direction, while my enhanced senses detected threats approaching from directions and dimensions that ordinary perception couldn't access. The transformation was becoming impossible to suppress or control through willpower alone. Commander Chen received a priority communication from Guardian facilities worldwide reporting similar escalations occurring simultaneously across multiple continents. The pattern suggested a coordinated campaign by hostile forces who had been waiting for exactly this type of catalyst event to launch whatever operation they had been planning. My awakening wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the trigger for conflicts that had been building toward inevitability for decades or possibly centuries. Dr. Martinez's monitoring equipment registered massive energy spikes emanating from my location that were visible to supernatural detection systems across multiple planes of existence. She explained that the dragon essence was entering its final bonding phase, which would either result in complete integration and unprecedented abilities, or catastrophic rejection that could create an explosion capable of leveling several city blocks. The process couldn't be stopped or reversed at this point, only guided toward the most favorable possible outcome. The facility's defensive arrays detected incoming teleportation signatures as multiple factions prepared to converge on our location simultaneously. Luna coordinated evacuation procedures for non-combat personnel, while veteran guardians took positions at strategic points throughout the underground complex. The battle that was about to begin would determine not just my personal fate, but the future relationship between the supernatural and ordinary worlds. Ancient containment protocols activated throughout the facility as artifacts and weapons that had been sealed away for emergencies were brought online. The very walls began to glow with protective symbols that had been inscribed by masters of defensive magic centuries ago, while the air itself seemed to thicken with accumulated power drawn from ley lines that converged beneath our location. This was no longer just a training facility, but a fortress preparing for war. My roommate Marcus was evacuated to a deeper level, along with other students whose abilities weren't considered combat ready, but not before he shared intelligence gathered from his connection to the city's plant network. The approaching entities weren't just supernatural beings, but representatives of forces that existed before human civilization began. Primordial powers that viewed the current situation as an opportunity to reclaim influence over a world they considered rightfully theirs. The consortium forces were merely the most visible threat among adversaries whose true nature defied easy categorization. Shadow creatures that fed on human fear were massing in the darkness between streetlights throughout the city, while beings of pure energy manipulated electromagnetic fields to interfere with communication systems and transportation networks. The battle would be fought on multiple levels of reality simultaneously, with victory requiring coordination between defenders who might normally consider each other enemies. Luna finished her preparations by activating abilities I hadn't seen during our previous encounters, surrounding herself with an aura of absolute zero temperature that could instantly freeze anything within several meters of her position. Her ice manipulation techniques evolved into something approaching weather control as she began generating localized blizzard conditions within the facility's main chamber. The temperature differential between her immediate vicinity and the surrounding areas created wind patterns that would interfere with enemy movement and visibility. Commander Chen's probability analysis reached critical decision points as multiple timeline branches converged toward inevitable confrontation. She announced that our best chance for survival required abandoning defensive positions and taking the fight to our enemies before they could complete whatever ritual or summoning they were attempting to perform. The facility's most powerful artifacts were distributed among combat-ready personnel as we prepared for operations that would expose us to dangers that exceeded normal training scenarios. The dragon essence within my system reached resonance frequency with something massive approaching from beneath the city, and I realized that the entity Marcus had detected wasn't just moving through root networks, but actually emerging from depths that connected to otherworldly realms. The ground beneath our feet began to vibrate with rhythmic pulses that felt like the heartbeat of something impossibly large, awakening from eons of slumber. Emergency broadcasts from Guardian facilities worldwide painted a picture of coordinated attacks occurring across every major population center, as dormant supernatural threats activated simultaneously. This wasn't a random escalation, but the opening phase of a campaign that had been planned across decades or centuries by intelligences whose patience and planning abilities exceeded human comprehension. The war between light and shadow that had been fought in secret throughout history was about to become impossible to hide from ordinary humanity. Dr. Martinez's final readings showed that the dragon essence integration would complete within the next hour, regardless of external circumstances, meaning that my abilities would either stabilize at levels that could rival the most powerful supernatural beings, or undergo catastrophic failure that could create a supernatural disaster visible from orbit. The facility's defensive systems were configured to contain such an explosion if necessary, but doing so would require sacrificing everyone currently inside the complex. As the first enemy forces breached our outer perimeters and alarms echoed throughout the underground chambers, I felt the dragon essence surge toward its final transformation phase. My reflection in the polished metal walls showed eyes that now contained swirling galaxies of golden fire, while energy crackled visibly around my hands in patterns that resembled miniature lightning storms. The moment of truth was approaching faster than anyone had prepared for, and the choices I made in the next few minutes would determine the fate of both worlds. The battle for my soul and the future of supernatural secrecy was about to begin in earnest, with forces gathering that hadn't been seen together since the ancient wars that shaped the hidden history of human civilization. My transformation from ordinary high school student to potential savior or destroyer of two worlds was reaching its climax, and there would be no returning to the simple life I had known just days earlier. The first wave of attackers materialized through the facility walls like ghosts passing through solid matter, their forms shifting between human appearance and something far more sinister. These weren't the same consortium agents from earlier, but elite operatives whose bodies had been so thoroughly modified by dark supernatural forces that they barely retained traces of their original humanity. Their leader wore the face of a middle-aged businessman, but shadows writhed beneath his skin like living tattoos, and his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes of malevolent intelligence. "We know you're here, Dragon Bearer!" he called out in a voice that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. "The essence you've bonded with belongs to powers far older and more deserving than a confused child who stumbled into abilities beyond his comprehension. Surrender willingly, and your death will be swift rather than the prolonged agony we'll inflict if you force us to extract what we need from your corpse." Luna responded by launching a barrage of ice spears that should have shredded the intruders instantly, but the projectiles passed harmlessly through their shifting forms as they phased between dimensions to avoid physical attacks. The temperature in the chamber plummeted as she increased her power output, creating frost patterns on every surface that spelled out tactical information for the other defenders in a code they had developed during previous battles. Commander Chen coordinated our response through hand signals while her probability analysis identified the optimal moments for counterattacks. Her enhanced perception allowed her to see split-second windows where the enemy operatives would be vulnerable between phase shifts, and she guided Luna's attacks with precision timing that forced several intruders back into solid form, just as ice crystals pierced their vital organs. The dragon essence within me roared with protective fury as hostile supernatural energies pressed against my consciousness like acid, eating through metal barriers. My enhanced senses detected layer upon layer of magical attacks targeting my mind directly, attempting to sever my connection to the primordial power flowing through my veins. Each assault felt like hammers pounding against the inside of my skull, while my vision flickered between normal sight and glimpses of otherworldly battlefields where the true conflict was taking place. Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the facility communication system with updates on my physiological readings that painted an increasingly dire picture. The stress of combat combined with the ongoing transformation was pushing my enhanced metabolism beyond sustainable limits, causing cellular damage that even supernatural healing abilities couldn't repair quickly enough to prevent permanent harm. She estimated less than 30 minutes before my nervous system would begin shutting down from overload. More attackers poured through dimensional rifts that opened throughout the complex as our enemies abandoned subtlety in favor of overwhelming force. Creatures that looked like living geometric patterns floated through the air while projecting beams of energy that turned solid matter into crystalline structures, trapping several guardian defenders in prisons of transformed metal and concrete. Others resembled humanoid figures made entirely of flowing liquid shadow that could reshape themselves to fit through any opening while maintaining their ability to manipulate physical objects. The facility's defensive systems responded by activating ancient protective circles carved into the floor and walls, causing brilliant lines of power to race through channels that had been prepared for exactly this type of incursion. The symbols blazed with accumulated energy from ley lines deep beneath the earth, creating barriers that forced the attackers to manifest in solid form or be repelled entirely from our dimensional space. Marcus appeared in the main chamber despite evacuation orders, his plant manipulation abilities having detected something crucial through his connection to the root networks spreading throughout the city. He reported that the massive entity approaching from below wasn't just a single creature, but an entire ecosystem of interconnected beings that had been dormant beneath urban areas for centuries, waiting for the right catalyst to trigger their emergence into our reality. The information changed everything about our tactical situation, as Commander Chen realized we were facing not just an assault on our facility, but the beginning of a supernatural invasion that could transform human civilization forever. Her probability calculations showed cascading failure scenarios where the awakening entities would spread across continents within weeks, consuming or converting every form of life they encountered, while establishing a new order based on principles that predated human existence. Luna's combat techniques evolved as she adapted to enemies whose abilities challenged everything she had learned during years of training. Her ice manipulation expanded into complete environmental control as she began generating localized weather systems within the underground complex, creating blizzard conditions in some areas while maintaining tropical temperatures in others to confuse attackers who relied on consistent environmental readings. The most terrifying opponents were beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime, appearing as translucent figures that could reach through dimensional barriers to attack us while remaining immune to our counterstrikes. Their touches drained life energy directly from living tissue, aging their victims decades in seconds while absorbing the stolen vitality to fuel their own supernatural abilities. Several Guardian defenders collapsed into desiccated husks before we developed tactics to avoid direct contact with these temporal predators. My golden eyes blazed with increasing intensity as the dragon essence responded to each new threat by unlocking abilities I hadn't known existed within my enhanced physiology. Energy projection became instinctive, as streams of molten fire erupted from my hands to incinerate enemies that conventional weapons couldn't touch, while my enhanced speed allowed me to move between attackers faster than their enhanced reflexes could track. The facility's main chamber transformed into a battlefield that defied conventional physics as forces representing multiple dimensions of reality clashed with weapons and abilities that shouldn't have been possible. Gravity fluctuated wildly as combatants manipulated fundamental forces, causing debris to float in chaotic orbits around points of concentrated supernatural energy while the very air crackled with dimensional distortions. Commander Chen received communications from Guardian facilities worldwide reporting similar invasions occurring simultaneously across every continent, confirming that this was indeed a coordinated campaign by entities whose planning spanned geological ages rather than mere decades. The attackers had waited until the dragon essence bonding reached critical phase before revealing their true objectives, using my transformation as both catalyst and cover for operations that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Dr. Yes? Martinez abandoned her medical monitoring station to join the combat, as her healing abilities proved crucial for keeping wounded defenders operational during the extended battle. Her touch could instantly repair injuries that would normally require weeks of recovery time, while her enhanced medical knowledge allowed her to identify weaknesses in enemy physiology that could be exploited by our attacks. The most disturbing discovery came when we realized that some of our attackers were former Guardian operatives who had been captured during previous missions and subjected to corruption processes that turned them into willing servants of hostile forces. These converted agents retained their training and knowledge of our tactics, while serving masters whose goals involved the complete subjugation or elimination of human civilization. Luna coordinated with other elemental manipulators throughout the facility to create environmental hazards that would disadvantage our enemies while providing tactical advantages for defenders who were familiar with the complex layout. Water pipes burst to create instant ice barriers. Electrical systems overloaded to generate electromagnetic pulses that disrupted enemy equipment, and ventilation systems were repurposed to distribute chemical compounds that revealed the true forms of shape-shifting infiltrators. The Dragon Essence integration reached a critical threshold as my consciousness expanded to encompass awareness of the broader supernatural conflict occurring across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. I could perceive the true scope of the invasion, as entities that had been banished from our reality eons ago used the weakening barriers between worlds to stage their return, bringing with them technologies and abilities that challenged the fundamental laws governing physical existence. Marcus Plant Network provided real-time intelligence about enemy movements throughout the city as his consciousness spread through root systems that connected every park, garden, and wild area within hundreds of miles. His reports painted a picture of coordinated strikes against every major supernatural facility, with attacking forces demonstrating intimate knowledge of defensive capabilities and personnel assignments that suggested extensive infiltration of previously secure organizations. The facility's most powerful defensive artifact activated automatically as threat levels exceeded predetermined thresholds, causing ancient symbols carved into the bedrock beneath our complex to blaze with accumulated power drawn from multiple ley line convergences. The energy release created a dome of protective force that prevented dimensional rifts from opening within our immediate vicinity, while simultaneously broadcasting a distress signal that could be detected by Allied forces across vast distances. Commander Chen probability analysis identified a narrow window of opportunity, where coordinated action by all remaining defenders could potentially turn the tide of battle, but success would require sacrifices that none of us were prepared to contemplate. The plan involved deliberately destabilizing the Dragon Essence integration process to create an explosion of primordial energy that would either destroy our attackers or tear open dimensional barriers that could never be sealed again. Dr. Martinez's monitoring equipment registered energy signatures, approaching from the deepest levels beneath the facility, as the entity Marcus had detected finally reached the surface after ascending through rock formations that should have been impossible for any living creature to traverse. The readings suggested something with the mass of a small mountain, but the complexity of a vast neural network, implying intelligence on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. Luna Ice manipulation abilities reached unprecedented levels as she began generating absolute zero temperatures that could freeze molecular motion itself, creating zones of perfect stasis where attacking enemies became trapped in crystalline matrices that prevented any form of movement or supernatural ability activation. The technique required enormous energy expenditure that left her visibly weakened after each application, but proved devastatingly effective against opponents whose abilities relied on constant motion between dimensions. The battle reached a turning point when several Guardian facilities worldwide managed to establish communication links despite the ongoing attacks, allowing coordinated responses that prevented our enemies from achieving their primary objectives at multiple locations simultaneously. The network effect created opportunities for mutual support and tactical coordination that individual facilities couldn't have achieved while operating in isolation. My enhanced perception detected patterns in the enemy assault that revealed strategic weaknesses in their otherwise overwhelming campaign. The attacking forces were powerful, but lacked the flexibility to adapt quickly to unexpected defensive tactics, suggesting that their plans had been developed over such extended time frames that rapid tactical adjustments were difficult or impossible to implement effectively. The Dragon Essence transformation accelerated toward completion as combat stress triggered evolutionary responses that pushed my enhanced physiology beyond previously documented limits. My cellular structure began incorporating elements that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal spacetime, while my nervous system developed new pathways that allowed consciousness to process information from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Commander Chen realized that traditional defensive strategies were inadequate for threats operating on the scale we were confronting, and began implementing experimental protocols that had never been tested under actual combat conditions. The techniques involved deliberately synchronizing supernatural abilities between multiple defenders to create composite effects that exceeded the sum of individual capabilities, but carried risks of permanent psychological fusion that could destroy individual identity. The facility's emergency systems detected massive seismic activity as the entity approaching from below began breaking through the final geological barriers, separating it from surface reality. The tremors caused structural damage throughout the underground complex, while simultaneously triggering ancient containment systems that had been installed to prevent exactly this type of dimensional incursion from reaching inhabited areas. Marcus reported through the plant network that similar entities were emerging simultaneously at locations worldwide, each one positioned beneath major population centers where their surfacing would cause maximum disruption to human civilization. The coordination required for such precise timing implied organizational capabilities that spanned not just continents, but potentially multiple planes of existence operating in perfect synchronization. Luna combat techniques evolved to incorporate time manipulation as she learned to create localized temporal fields where her ice attacks could be accelerated or slowed according to tactical requirements. The ability allowed her to bypass enemy defenses that relied on prediction algorithms, since her attacks could arrive before the targeting process had been completed or after defensive responses had been exhausted. The dragon essence within me resonated with something vast and ancient stirring in the depths beneath our feet, and I realized that the approaching entity wasn't just another attacker, but potentially an ally whose awakening had been triggered by my own transformation. The recognition sent waves of relief through my enhanced consciousness as I understood that not all the supernatural forces converging on our location were necessarily hostile to human survival. Dr. Martinez's analysis of my ongoing physiological changes revealed that the Dragon Essence integration was approaching a stable configuration that would grant abilities far beyond anything previously documented in Guardian records. However, the process required one final catalyst that could only be provided by direct contact with primordial forces that existed before the current reality had been established through cosmic evolutionary processes. The facility's defensive barriers began resonating with harmonic frequencies generated by the approaching underground entity, creating standing wave patterns that interfered with enemy dimensional manipulation abilities, while simultaneously opening communication channels that transcended normal limitations of language and consciousness. The contact established through this resonance would determine whether the final phase of my transformation would result in salvation or catastrophe for both the supernatural and ordinary worlds. Commander Chen probability streams converged toward a single critical moment when all the various forces gathering around our location would reach maximum intensity simultaneously. The outcome of that convergence would establish the balance of power between competing supernatural factions for centuries to come, while also determining whether humanity would retain its current dominant position on Earth or become a protected species under the guardianship of beings whose power exceeded current human comprehension. The battle that had begun as a desperate defense of our training facility was evolving into something far more significant, as representatives of every major supernatural faction converged on our location to witness or influence the completion of my dragon essence transformation. The stakes had escalated beyond personal survival to encompass the future relationship between all forms of consciousness that shared our reality, with decisions made in the next few minutes reverberating across dimensions and timelines that stretched toward infinity. The underground entity finally broke through the facility floor with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, but instead of the monstrous creature we had expected, what emerged was a magnificent dragon whose scales shimmered with the same golden fire that now blazed in my eyes. The ancient being rose through layers of concrete and steel as if they were mere illusion, its massive form somehow fitting within spaces too small to contain something of its size through manipulation of dimensional geometry that defied conventional physics. Young bearer, the dragon spoke directly into my consciousness with a voice that carried the weight of millennia. You have done well to resist corruption, while the essence within you completed its bonding process. The forces arrayed against us tonight represent chaos and entropy, seeking to unmake the careful balance that has allowed both our kinds to coexist throughout the ages. Your transformation marks the beginning of a new era, where such balance must be actively maintained rather than simply preserved through secrecy. So there you have it, from one bowl of cursed ramen to becoming the bridge between two worlds that were never meant to stay separate forever. My golden eyes still burn with dragon fire. Luna's ice crystals still dance around her fingers, and somewhere beneath every major city, ancient powers are stirring from their eternal slumber. The Midnight Tournament was just the beginning, and now that the barriers between realities are cracking, who knows what other supernatural secrets are waiting to be discovered in the most ordinary places. Maybe that weird shop on your street corner isn't as normal as it seems.